We're online. Glad to have you with us online and here in the classroom. A little light today in the classroom, so hopefully some more people will come in while we're started the lesson. My name's Norm Ellis. This is the Adult One Bible Study at Grace Baptist Church. I'm glad to have you with us today. And we're going to be in Acts chapter 16. Acts chapter 16. We'll be looking at these 3 points under every opportunity. The first point is witness at the river, verses 11 through 15. Second is witness in jail, and that's in verses 29 through 34. And the last main point is witness upon release, 35 through 40. So you can see our emphasis is on witnessing. Anyway, we're, like I said, in Acts chapter 16 today. It's session number 6. Starts on page 55 if you have a copy of the study book. And our main point, main idea today is that believers must take advantage of opportunities to share the gospel, those divine appointments that God will give us. Be ready for them. So we're going to jump right into it, and let's have a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this time we have to study your word. It's always a joy and it's an honor as well. Help us, Lord, to learn those truths that you want us to learn today. Those principles that will help us as Christians to be that witness for you. Be with those that are on their way here. Keep them safe, Lord. Be with those that are homesick. Help them to get better. And just pray for those that are away from us, traveling, whatever it might be. And thank you again for all you've done for us. In your Son's precious name we pray these things. Amen. All right. So we're going to jump right into the lesson today. It's a pretty good lesson. One thing I do want to make sure I tell you, sometimes I forget to do that, is that we have handouts that you can get a copy of. For instance, here's my handouts today. And so if you want a copy of them, make sure you contact our church. Get a hold of Pastor Matthew. You can do that by email, I believe. You just go online and you can find an email. You can send him a request for this. Tell him you want to be on the mailing list, the email list for the handouts for the Adult One Bible Study, and he'll be glad to put you on that list, and you'll get a copy of our handouts delivered right to your home, on your laptop, whatever it might be. So I'll be referring to some of them today on the assumption that some of you out here do have them. And if you don't, like I said, take advantage of that opportunity. So begin our lesson today. See, I had a question. Let me see, where was it here? There it is. So, have there been times when unexpected opportunities came your way? Have you ever had an opportunity that came your way? And what did you do? You know, what was the opportunity? How did you feel about it? Those kind of things. And was this opportunity something that maybe perhaps changed your life in some way? Maybe the course of your life. Those things do happen in our lives. In our handouts, I have something called the intro paragraph. It's also available in the study book, which, like I said, starts on page 55. And this intro paragraph is also there. But I'm going to go ahead and read that for you. And in the intro paragraph, it says, "There is a tide in the affairs of men." Let's try that again. There is a tide in the affairs of men. That's kind of odd writing almost, you know. But those of you who are maybe familiar with Shakespeare, this might look familiar. Shakespeare's character here in this particular play was addressing how we often succeed or fail based on whether we seize opportunities when they arise. Does that principle also impact the way we share our faith? Sometimes unexpected opportunities to witness come our way like a divine appointment. That's a really good term. I like to use that term. The question, though, is, are we willing to get outside our comfort zone and take advantage of such encounters? Excuse me. So the main question we got on this, associated with this intro paragraph, is, can you give maybe some examples of opportunities you lost because you failed to take advantage of them? Boy, that'd be a difficult one. No one likes to admit to losses or failures, right? You know, sometimes we try to forget those things as soon as they happen, right? So I'm trying to think of some offhand, maybe that I've encountered. And I know there's been several, but sometimes you don't really know what they are until later on. I can think of a lot of examples of opportunities that I took a chance on, and I could tell you what happened because of that. For one thing, joining the Air Force, that changed my life a lot. Meeting my wife after I joined the Air Force, that really changed my life in such a great way. There's a lot of things I can think back on those things, but sometimes those opportunities that we let slip through our fingers can be a distasteful time in our life, and maybe we don't want to think about that. Maybe that's why I can't remember any right now. But it mentions a word, comfort zone. Comfort zone. I got that written on the marker board over here. For those of you at home, I hope you can read it. The image is sometimes not the best, but the word is comfort zone right here. How would you define that term? What do you think, Steve? You have any ideas about that?
What?
The term comfort zone. When you hear that term, what does that might take you in your mind?
I'm snuggled into my recliner.
Oh, right. His comfort zone is physical. Mm-hmm. And he's in his recliner with probably maybe the heat turned on, or maybe a little massage. I don't know what kind of recliner it is. Perhaps it's just a nice, comfortable thing that you've gotten used to, right? Well, comfort zone can be physical. It can also be mental. There is a definition I have on handout number 1, page 2, and I put it there on purpose so you wouldn't see it right off the bat. I'll go ahead and read that for us here. Comfort zone. The term was coined based on a classic experiment in psychology. And this was conducted way back in 1908. Wow, that's ancient history, right? It was by two psychologists, Robert Yerkes and John Dodson. I hope I pronounced Mr. Yerkes' name correctly. If not, well, I'm sure he'll contact me. It refers, what does it refer to? It refers to a place or a situation where a person feels safe or at ease and without stress. You're one with your recliner, right, Steve?
Yes. Do one of the things.
Well, anyway, we know this place completely. This is the keys here. We know this place completely, and we are in control of almost everything associated with that place. The comfort zone is a safe space where we don't risk, but neither do we grow. It's not simply a physical space, but it can be a mental concept as well. And there are situations, maybe the extreme cases of a comfort zone, where you would have a problem would be with an ailment known as agoraphobia. I believe it's agoraphobia. And agoraphobia manifests itself with not wanting to leave your house. Some people are very comfortable in their house. They control everything. They know where everything is. Outside that house, that's an unknown. That's a scary place. And so they want to stay home. I don't know how many of you have been on vacation before, but what's the one thing you can't wait to do when you get home? A good night's rest on your bed, right? Because chances are the beds you were in before wasn't exactly like your bed. There's nothing better than either a recliner, like you said, or a nice, comfortable bed, something you're used to. And that's our comfort zone, right? That's part of our comfort zone. But do we grow if we stay in our comfort zone? What do you think? Don't grow, do we? We stagnate. We stay in an area like that and we can't leave it. So question, can you give personal examples of opportunities you lost? Now we talked about this already, because you failed to take advantage of them. It could be any kind of situation. You didn't want to leave your comfort zone. You wanted to stay right where it was. Now, and I could probably think of some examples. I worked for a while for a state prison, and I was very comfortable in the job I did. And I was very good at what I did. I worked in a business office. And we'd go to these meetings up in Lacey, Washington, and we'd go to these things, and I'd hear these stories about how these people started where I was, and now they're way up the chain in certain spaces, And they would ask me, says, well, why are you still working there at the prison? Why don't you come up to Lacey? We got bigger opportunities up here. And I didn't feel like doing it. And sometimes in life, you get comfortable in certain situations, you don't want to leave them. I didn't want to move to Lacey, for instance. I didn't want to uproot my family and find a new church and all those things that go with having a move like that. And even though I may have had opportunities to do that, I felt comfortable where I was, so I stayed where I was. And actually, that was an opportunity that was missed. I missed a certain amount of earnings that way. But you count one against the other. I could have left my friends and family here. I could have got a little more money over here. I decided, I like it where I'm at. Anything like that you came across in your life, Steve, like that you felt like, this is an opportunity, but I'm just going to let it go, and later you might have regretted it?
I'm sure there are some out there, but there's moves I've made that I really glad I did make them.
Yeah.
Actually, there is one. Getting a medical discharge from the Air Force. That irritated the snot out of me.
Didn't want to do that, right, later on?
No, I didn't have a choice in that matter.
Yeah, that's true. That sometimes those things happen too.
Yeah.
But things like that do happen. It says, how can a comfort zone be dangerous when you're supposed to be looking for opportunities to share the gospel? That's a good question. We sometimes are given these opportunities, and we think, well, I could do that. I could talk to this person that I work with, but they might, he might talk to other friends of his there, and they might start making fun of me, right? Or I might be looked upon differently after that point, or whatever. And so we don't do those things. We lose those opportunities, and we don't want to do that. We're looking at examples today of Paul and Silas and some opportunities they had, and they took a chance. They took a risk. Earlier, Paul and his missions team had hit some snags, but the Holy Spirit had guided them to Macedonia. And today's study focuses on the first stop in that trip in a town called Philippi. It also reveals how Paul and Silas were able to take advantage of God-given opportunities to share the gospel message. And if you do have a copy of our handouts, you will see, what did I do with my handout copy? Oh, here it is. A map. It's handout number 2. And this shows a little bit of the area where Paul's second missionary journey. And so I don't know if you guys can see it home when I move up close or not. Here's our map. But Paul and Silas traveled up to Jerusalem, and then they hit Antioch, and they went from Antioch on this upper red trail all the way up above Mysia and into Macedonia at the very top left, in a little town called Philippi. And it's the northwestern point of that little trail right there, right where my finger is touching. Anyway, it's hard to see. I apologize. We don't have a larger map showing that. We have these maps over here. This is the first journey, second journey, and third journey. And so you'd have to look at this map here. It'd be right about where my fingertip is touching right there. That's where they're at. So Acts chapter 16, the first part of our chapter, I'm going to pick it up the story on verse 6, and I'm going to read 6 through 10. This is just the introductory area. Give us an idea where we're at before we start the main points of our lesson. And they do skip some verses in our lesson that we're going to read through anyway. Start at verse 6 of chapter 16 of Acts. It says, they, and by the they they're talking about is Paul, Silas primarily, but also Luke had joined them as a young man, Luke was there with them, and Timothy had joined them as a young man. Luke was not a young man at that point. But anyway, so there's actually, at this time, 4 people on this particular journey. They passed through the Phrygian and Galatian regions, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And after they came to Mysia, they're trying to get into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not permit them. And passing by Mysia, they came to Troas. A vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing and appealing to him, saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when he had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. And so that's where we are at in our verses introduction-wise. And we're going to look at the first point here today. Our first main point is that believers should look for ways to turn everyday encounters into opportunities for gospel conversations. And it's titled Witness at the River. So they have a chance to witness at the river. So we're going to see what that's all about. Let's go ahead and read these verses. And I want you to listen for the unexpected audience of Paul's message. Okay? Unexpected audience. And I have number 1. So you get to hear my voice some more. So putting out to sea from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace, and on the day following to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia, a Roman colony. And we were staying in this city for some days. And on a Sabbath day, we went outside the gate to a riverside where we were supposing that there would be a place of prayer. And we sat down and began speaking to the women who had assembled. A woman was there named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, and a seller of purple fabrics, a worshiper of God, was listening. And the Lord opened her heart, and she responded to the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household had been baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay." And she prevailed upon us. So, what was this unexpected audience that Paul ran into? He was hoping when he got to Philippi, probably, to go to a synagogue, because that was his practice. He'd go to the synagogue first, and normally the synagogue would be asking people who had traveled, let's say from Jerusalem or such like he had, if they would like to say something. This would give him a chance to share about Jesus to the Jewish synagogue. In Philippi, which was in a pagan area, of course, apparently there's not enough Jewish families to form a synagogue. And I think, if you remember right, I think that you had to have 10 families. So in all of Philippi, apparently there wasn't 10 families that they could put together to form a synagogue. So where did he go instead? Where did Paul go instead of to a synagogue? Down by the riverside. Down by the riverside. Ever heard that term, down by the riverside? I think that must be where it came from. I don't know. But that's where he came. He went to was the river. Why would he go to the river? Some people would ask. Apparently, and I did not know this either, but apparently that is a very common place on a Sabbath day for Jewish worshipers to go to an area like that, a common area by a riverside, for a time of worship. And that's where Paul decided to go. And this little town of Philippi, by the way, it was on the path from Neapolis to Philippi was called the Ignatian Way. It was an east to west main road, if you will, that would have been very familiar to Paul. Philippi was named for Philip of Macedonia. Who was Philip of Macedonia? Are you history buffs? Does that sound familiar? How about Alexander the Great? Ever heard of him? Well, his father was Philip of Macedonia, the king of Macedonia. So that's the kind of connection. Philip had conquered the city about 500 years earlier, and the city then later fell under Roman rule in 168 BC, and Octavian, or Augustus, declared it to be a Roman colony in 31 BC. Over time, Paul developed a close relationship with the Philippian church. Anyway, so they went down to the river. And like I mentioned before, Jewish law required a city to have at least 10 Jewish men who were the head of households to form a synagogue. So the Jews had limited influence in Philippi. Does that mean that that would have been the only people who would believe in God, do you think? Good question. How about Gentiles? Well, they wouldn't necessarily believe in just a God, would they? They'd probably have a pagan background and might believe in a multitude of gods. But there was a segment of Gentiles who had been influenced enough by Jewish people in the past that they became believers in God, the one God. And this lady that we talked about, mentioned already, was one of these people. So she was at the river with these other ladies. And So the Jews had limited influence in Philippi because they're small, didn't have a synagogue. So the Jews would often establish places of prayer near rivers, and that's where Paul and his friends found a prayer meeting outside the city of the Gangites River. And one of these people is named Lydia. And while Luke did not share the backgrounds of all the women, he did note that Lydia was a worshiper of God. Now, when you see that term in Acts, it's meaning a person who has been heavily influenced by the Jewish religion, but have not become proselytes. Now, what's a proselyte? We mentioned that before. It's somebody who wants to become a Jew in religion. Now, can they become a Jew in ethnicity? Of course not. So they're always kind of looked down upon, proselytes are, a little bit, by those ethnic Jews. But they were Jews in the sense of the word that they did follow God. But she had not gone that far. She was how'd they say it again here? I know I read this somewhere. A worshiper of God. So this suggests she was a Gentile who had embraced Jewish practices. She was originally from Thyatira and was a business owner who sold purple cloth. Purple dyes were costly and considered the color of royalty. So what do we know about Lydia probably here? She was what kind of a person? She was a businesswoman probably, right? And it looks like she had a prosperous business because it looks like she had means of that sign. Well, God opened Lydia's heart and she became a Christian. She and her husband understood the message and they gave their lives to Christ and were baptized. In doing so, they became the first European believers recorded in Scripture. Stay at my house. It says Lydia demonstrated her newfound faith by inviting the missionaries to stay with her family. Her ability to house them indicates she also had wealth because of the size of her home. Most people would have used every possible part of their house. They didn't have a guest room. But she had a guest room, apparently, that she was able to put people up who were visiting. So how can we be sensitive to opportunities for sharing the gospel, do you think? We see that Paul was sensitive, right? He went to where he thought people would be, right? And he heard them praying. They were God-fearing people there, God-fearing women. And he had opportunity, and he spoke to them, didn't he? He shared with them who Jesus was. And they responded. We never know who that person is, that God has already prepared the way. But there's so many that we sometimes miss those opportunities. We don't want to do that. So Christians need to be praying for opportunities to share the gospel and for the sensitivity to act on those opportunities when God provides them. When you have these divine appointments, if no one wants to miss an appointment. Well, maybe we do. I like to miss my dentist appointments. But they will penalize you for missing a dentist appointment. You'll have to pay. So I have to go anyway, even though I don't like it. But we don't want to miss appointments. We always try to make those appointments. So when we're sensitive when God is talking to us about those kind of things, and we know that the Holy Spirit is sharing with us, now's the opportunity. You need to go down and talk to this person that I've set before you. We don't want to miss those opportunities and say, well, I'm not too sure how that was fun. Well, that's not your fault. That's not your business. Your business is to do what the Lord wants you to do. And so that's what Paul did. So they did that. Now, so this is laying the groundwork for the next part, but they kind of skip over some of the verses. So I want to read those as well. After this encounter with these women and with Lydia, it says in verse 16 through, let me see, where am I going to read to? 16 through 28. It says, it happened that as we were going to the place of prayer, a slave girl, having a spirit of divination, met us, who was bringing her masters much profit by fortune telling. Okay, little point here. Who was this person? It was a young girl who was a slave, right? And apparently she had a demonic oppression or possession, and she would make money by supposedly telling the future, right? Anyway, following after Paul, she kept crying out, saying, "These men are bondservants of the Most High God, who are proclaiming to you the way of salvation." Now that doesn't sound too bad. Paul and Silas, they wanted people to know who they were, right? They wanted to let them know what they were doing. But Would you want a girl screaming this over and over and over and over and over as you're walking through a town? Probably not, right? Probably not. It says she continued doing this for many days. So it's bad enough you put up with it a few minutes, maybe a few hours. Many days. Well, even Paul has a limit in his patience. So Paul was greatly annoyed. And at last he turned and said to the spirit in this girl, I command you in the name of Jesus to come out of her. And it came out that very moment. But when her masters saw that their hope of a prophet was now gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. And when they had brought them to the chief magistrates, they said, these men are throwing our city into confusion, being Jews, and are proclaiming customs which are not law for us to accept or to observe, being Romans. Little note here. These people were very proud of the fact that they were Roman. And this little colony of Philippi was a Roman colony. And they had the protection of Rome. And they had the protection of all the rights and citizenship of that place. So and they made this assumption that these people are just Jews. They come here to cause problems in our town, in our Roman way of doing things. So that's what they were doing. And so these people who were lost the money, they stirred up the population and tried to get their way to get Paul and Silas in prison. Well, it worked. The crowd rose up against them, and the chief magistrates. Who were the chief magistrates? They were just the authority figures in the city, right? They tore their robes off of Paul and Silas, and proceeded to order them to be beaten with rods. That was not a fun thing. And when they had struck them with many blows, they then threw them into prison and commanded the jailer to guard them securely. Just a side note again here. The jailer's job was to guard them securely. If he didn't do his job, he forfeited his life. So they wanted to make sure that the jailers would make sure these people were in the jail where they're supposed to be. Otherwise, they could be in trouble. Anyway, and he, the jailer, having received such a command, threw them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. They're not leaving. But about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns of praise to God. And the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there came a great earthquake. So the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the jail doors were opened, and everyone's chains fell off. When the jailer awoke and he saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was intending to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. Because remember, he forfeited his life if he lost his prisoners. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, do not harm yourself, we are all here. Wow. So this jailer probably went to sleep listening to the hymns, listening to the prayers that these crazy Jewish people were doing, right? And then an earthquake woke him up and he thought they were all gone. And he found out they were not gone. So that's where we are in our story. So we heard about the witness at the river. Now we're going to talk about witness in jail. Witness in jail. So Steve, I think you got number 2. Could you read that for us? And let's see. What's that?
Acts 16, 29 to
29 to 34, yes. And after you, while you're reading it, think about how the jailer's treatment of Paul and Silas has suddenly changed. Go ahead, read it.
And he called for lights and rushed in. Trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. And after he brought them out, he said, Sirs, what must I do to be saved? They said, Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him together with all who were in his house. And he took them that very hour of the night and washed their wounds, and immediately he was baptized, he and all his household. And he brought them into his house, set food before them, and rejoiced greatly, having believed in God with his whole household.
Wow. So we see a lot going on here in these verses. What kind of change do we see come across the jailer as far as his treatment of Paul and Silas? Now let's see. First of all, he stuck them in the inner prison, right, to just sit there after they've been beaten and bleeding. Didn't do anything to treat their wounds or anything, right? In the deepest, darkest spot of the prison, right? Then what did he do afterwards? He brought them out, didn't he? out into the light, and he took care of their wounds. He probably gave them food, I think, and comfort, right? And he asked him a question. What did he ask Paul? What was the question he said?
What must I do to be saved?
Yeah, what must I do to be saved? Now, that's an interesting question right there in itself. Do we know what he meant by that? Not exactly. We don't know for sure if he meant salvation in the sense of a Christian salvation experience, or what must I do so they don't kill me because of what happened here. You know, I can be saved from that. We're not really sure exactly. We do know he was what? Probably listening, right? Listening to them while they're praying. Listening to them while they're singing those hymns, probably hymns from the book of Psalms. It says the jailer was seeking a resolution to the fear he now felt. So that was one of the things he changed. He was a very confident man. He knew where his prisoners all were. They were locked up and safe. Now he's not so confident. Now he's fearful, right? And so he says, as a refuge from the dangers he faced, he was fearing from these things. The jailer knew that the missionaries had been preaching about salvation, and God used the circumstances to prepare his heart. The jailer's question, what must I do to be saved, could have meant that he was looking for a way to escape death. Because remember, that's a death sentence for a jailer, to let your prisoners free. More likely, though, it implied a need for spiritual salvation, because we know that he was probably listening to all this stuff earlier before he went to sleep. Either way, the answer was the same. The answer was what? What did Paul say? Well, you got to be a Jew first. You got to do circumcision. No!
Believe in the Lord.
Yeah. That seems pretty simple, right? Almost trite in a way. But he means be committed in your belief. He means active faith. You believe in the Lord, and you can be saved. You and your household. Now, that's an interesting term in itself. A lot of people have used that term to sometimes believe things that were not exactly taught in the Bible. Things like infant baptism and things like that, because they're assuming that there was infants in the household. We don't know that for a fact. And also it says in that the whole household, very possibly the people in that household were all of age to be able to understand these things, and they all had been witnessed to by Paul and Silas, and also by the example of their father. They were all in that same area, and so that salvation then was available to all of them, and they all responded. We see this as a great thing for this man and his family, right? It says 4 times in this passage, Luke, as you write, referred to the members of the jailer's house here. Paul assured them that you and your household could be saved. Twice, Luke noted that everyone in the family did, in fact, receive Christ. Finally, he noted that they were all baptized. Like Lydia, the salvation of one family member inspired a decision by every member of the family. As Paul and Silas took advantage of the opportunities God provided, entire families were being transformed. And we see now the jailer has a total change of heart. What does he do next? After he spoke the word of the Lord to them, right? And he took them that very hour of the night, and the jailer then washed their wounds, and immediately he was then baptized after that. He and all his household, it says. And he brought them into his house and set food before them and rejoiced greatly, having believed in God with his whole household. So this person who was in the deep, darkest part of the prison, the pit, if you will, of prison, right? Shackled, probably arms and feet. He was now an honored guest in the jailer's home. He was in a place of honor. He was set at the table, giving that special place. He was fed. They rejoiced greatly. Can you see a better example of a change of heart when somebody becomes a Christian? Boy, this is one of the best ones, isn't it? I think it is. Anyway, so we see this witness in jail, and the word. It talks about the word of the Lord, including the gospel message. It says everyone who is of age to understand. We're also agreeing with this as well. And so when we share the gospel faithfully, can we have a tremendous impact on future generations? Yeah, we can, can't we? Why is verbally sharing the gospel important, do you think? Is it important to verbally share the gospel? We can share the gospel in many ways, right? In this day and age, we have all kinds of social media. We could also write letters. We could also call on the phone. We could also, but we could also make a verbal plea to them, if you will, about the gospel message. That is kind of the most effective. Why would that be more effective, do you think? A verbal sharing of the gospel. I think it's because you're putting into your own words, you're right in front of the person, they're hearing you, they're seeing your emotions at the same time, they're understanding the importance to you because you're emphasizing it like you are. I think that's the best way to. And so, is it the only way? No. But it's one of the best ways to share the gospel. It allows people to see closely what you're talking about. Okay, so we talked about witness at the river, we talked about witnessing in the jail. So let's look at the last point. Well, we're doing pretty good at time this time. The last point is witness upon release. Witness upon release. For these last 6 verses, I want you to listen for ways that Paul and Silas demonstrated boldness. This is kind of an interesting verse here. It says, and when day had come, so all night long they're with this jailer, right? After they've been released from the prison itself by the earthquake. It says, when day had come, the chief magistrates sent their policemen saying, go ahead and release those men. The jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, the chief magistrate have sent to release you. Therefore, come out now and go in peace. So at this point he was thinking, we'll keep them here so nobody can see them, right? Because I'm supposed to have them in jail. But now, hey, they've been released, so you can come on out, right? Therefore, come out now and go in peace. The term "go in peace" is kind of an interesting kind of term. What do you think that might mean? Go in peace. You're free to go. It could be something as simple as that, along with a blessing to go with it also. It says however, though, Paul and Silas had other plans. Let's read the rest of these things. Paul said to them, they have beaten us in public without trial, men who are Romans, and have thrown us into prison, and now they are sending us away secretly? No, indeed, but let them come themselves and bring us out. The policemen reported these words to the chief magistrates. They were then afraid when they heard that these men were Romans, and they came and appealed to them. And when they had brought them out, they kept begging them to leave the city. They went out of the prison and entered the house of Lydia. And when they saw the brethren, they encouraged them and departed. There's a lot in these verses too, isn't there? We see something very interesting. Hey, they relented the next day. We've beaten them. They've been in prison for a day. I think that's enough. Let them go, right? And Paul said, no.
Excuse me?
You're not getting away with that. Because remember, they supposed them to be what? Jewish rabble, right? Riffraff. We're Romans.
Well, that's what they were told by the crowds.
Well, that's true. Yeah, but
it can't be.
Yeah,
it's got to be true.
But it's that superiority. Well, we're Romans, and you're just a riffraff that we conquered, right? And so it was that kind of an attitude they had. They did not know that they were Roman. They were Roman citizens, and they were. Well, Paul was especially. I don't know about Silas. I think he was as well. Not sure about that. But Paul said, no, we're Roman citizens. You have beaten us without any trial. We, as Roman citizens, have all the rights and privileges of a Roman. And one of them is, you had to have a proper trial before you were punished. You didn't do that. And then you threw us into prison. And now you want us to send us away secretly? No. But let them come themselves and bring us out. So they're asking for the chief honchos of the town to walk all the way down to the jailhouse and escort Paul and Silas out as you would a guest, a dignitary. As you would a dignitary, in a way. Okay? So the magistrates, they were afraid when they heard they were Romans, okay? And it says they came and appealed to them. And when they had brought them out, they kept begging them to leave the city. So here are these people who are now bowing before Paul and Silas, right? And why is this important, though? Paul knew this too. Why is this important, do you think? What would be the attitude, do you think, about the people who have become new Christians there in Philippi if Paul did not do this? Do you think they would have a real negative attitude about the Christians, the rest of the people? They'd look down on them. They may kick them out of the town also, right? So this is a very good point. Paul is setting a very public example by what he demanded of these people. He demanded they instead come and say, we were wrong, and we're so wrong as dignitaries, we're gonna escort you. You're gonna be our honored person to come through the town. So everybody can see that these people are okay. What we did was wrong. And these people are not to be looked down upon and caused by a situation like this. So the young church in Philippi would have that benefit of the fact that, well, this is the church that Paul and Silas started. Oh my, that's right. Those Romans, they were Romans and we did them bad. We got to treat them right. Otherwise the word could get back about what we did. So this is actually quite crafty of Paul, if you think about it. Paul was thinking along these lines, I believe. And so they wanted to please go, please. We don't want you to stay. Please go, right? Let's see, where was I in this? So it asks a question here. What did Paul and Silas do once they were escorted out of jail? What did they do? They just left? No, they didn't, did they? In verse 40, it says, they went out of the prison, and they entered the house of Lydia. And when they saw the brethren, they encouraged them. And then they departed, it says. So, they're not leaving on the terms of the magistrates. They're leaving on their own terms. And their own terms were, when we feel good and ready to go, after we've done what we want to do, we'll leave then. And they were not bothered anymore. It's real interesting to note that as well. So, but they mainly wanted to do this because they wanted to do what? They wanted to encourage them. They wanted to help these young Christians. Lydia and the others who had become Christians there. They wanted to encourage them. They wanted to admonish them. They wanted to help them. So, was the Philippian church going to be a church that didn't suffer any kind of persecution, do you think? No. Of course they would. But this encouragement that Paul was given and Paul and Silas was given helped them to face that adversity. Because they could always look and say, well, Paul and Silas, when they faced adversity, they did such and such, and God blessed them, right? So this would be an example for them, and they would also be encouraged the same thing. They would be praying, they would be singing in hymns as well. Verse 40 is like the key verse here, by the way. Where was I? What did they do? They encouraged them. So what are some ways that we can encourage one another, especially in difficult times? How can we encourage some people? Any ways you can think of that? How about offering to pray with them, right? Yeah. How about if there's a situation where let's say they lost their job, they don't have much money right now coming in. Can we help somebody in a situation? Sure we can. We can help organize meals for them. We can maybe help them in a job interview. We can, different things like that. We can encourage one another also in difficult times, especially believers. Now we can do that for non-believers as well as a witness to them, I know. But especially believers, we want to make sure that we definitely give them the benefit of our encouragement. Do you think this would also help them, these new Christians, would help them in their witness as well? Sure it would, wouldn't it? It would encourage them. It would help them to see, hey, Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke, these men came and they weren't ashamed of Christ. They were willing to go to prison just for us. What else could we do as well? I'm sure they thought the same way. So would it encourage them? Yes, it would. So this mutual encouragement, does this help advance God's kingdom? Yeah, that's kind of an obvious yes, of course it does, Norm, right? We can see that in the fact of what happened here in the early church. Whenever this happened, we see what? Growth, right? Growth of the Christian church. So I want to, any questions on that part? Anything? Or comments? No? All right. Let's see. So after this story, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, right, would be in chapter 17, verses 1 through 15. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. It says, "Now when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews." There's enough Jewish families there. "And according to Paul's custom, he went to them. And for 3 Sabbaths he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead, saying, 'This Jesus, whom I am proclaiming to you, is the Christ, the anointed one, the expected Messiah.' And it says that some were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of God-fearing Greeks and a number of leading women. It says, but the Jews, now they're talking about the Jews that wouldn't accept Christ, became jealous, and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, they formed a mob and set the city in an uproar." Sounds familiar, right? "Attacking the house of Jason." Who was Jason? Jason was a person who gave them shelter, that allowed them to meet with him, and probably was an early Christian as well. "They were seeking to bring them out to the people. When they did not find them, they grabbed a hold of Jason and some of the brethren also there before the city authorities, shouting, 'These men who have upset the world have come here also, and Jason has welcomed them. And they all act in contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus.' And they stirred up the crowd and the city authorities who heard these things, and when they had received a pledge from Jason and the others, they released them." So Jason said, no, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing it. "So then Paul," it says, "the brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. And when they had arrived, they went to the synagogue of the Jews." Now what's interesting here is this particular group acted differently from almost all the other groups. This is a really neat compliment to the people of Berea. It says, "Now these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, carefully examining the Scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. Therefore many of them believed, along with them a number of prominent Greek women and men. But when the Jews of Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul and Berea also, they came there as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then immediately the brethren sent Paul out as far as the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. Now those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they left." By the way, if you notice, the narrative changes from we to they when Paul's speaking here, when Luke is talking about what happened. So a lot of biblical theologians theorize that probably Luke stayed in Philippi, while the rest of the team went on to Thessalonica and to Berea. So anyway, so that's kind of the rest of the story there. Did Paul and Silas have good receptions or kind of bad receptions sometimes? Kind of bad sometimes, right? But also some good positive ones, especially the one in Berea. So we don't know when we're sharing the gospel message if we're going to have a positive or maybe a negative response. But you know what? God handles that, right? God handles that. We are responsible for only one thing. That's to proclaim the gospel. Proclaim the gospel and let people know what it means to be a Christian. And that they can become a Christian as well. So we talked about these 3 areas here, and the outline points was witness at the river, witness at the jail, and witness upon release. And so these correspond to these 3 things here. Believers, Christians, should look for ways to turn everyday encounters into opportunities for the gospel conversation. Did Paul and Silas do that when they went down to that river and saw those God-fearing women? Yes, they did, didn't they? Second point, believers should be ready to verbalize the gospel message. Be ready to talk about it, ready to say what God's done in a personal way. Personalize it, what God has done for you. That'll make an impact. And the third point is that believers should encourage other believers. We talk about mutual encouragement, lifting each other up, right? Now I got on the board here, I didn't talk about specifically this, but in what ways did Paul and Silas behave unexpectedly? Well, when you're in prison, you don't expect people to be praying out loud and leading hymns and stuff like that, right? So
And
that's
when the doors are open, they don't expect you to sit there.
yeah, the earthquake happened and all the shit changed. Just happened to fall right off. By the way, I don't know how an earthquake does that. That's pretty interesting, but it did because an angel probably took them right off. But anyway, they behaved unexpectedly, right? The jailer didn't expect that. So that's that point. But anyway, we have hindrances and objections here. So what might be some things that hold us back from sharing the gospel? We kind of talked about that already, right? Fear is a big one, right? Well, that'd be another one maybe. How about not knowing the situation? You know, something about the unknown. It could be many things. Lots of things can hinder us. What about objections? Under objections, what might be some objections that people might raise when they hear the gospel?
Yeah, it's just a fairy tale.
You know, I've heard this before. I think it's a myth. I heard one of the other myths. You know, the Greek myths or Roman myths or something like that. Isn't that what it is? You know?
Yeah, that's what you believe. But,
Yeah.
you know,
It could be a lot of objections. It could be something like, well, you know what? That's for the Jews.
I don't like being.
I'm not a Jew. It doesn't apply to me, right? What was that you were saying?
I don't like being called a sinner because I don't believe I am.
I'm a good person on balance. You know, I beat my slaves a bit. You know, I do a few things that they might say, but you know, I'm nice to the rest of the people, so it's a good balance. I'm a pretty good guy overall. Could be something like that too as well. We have objections in our own lives as well, right? Well, you know, God's gonna have to love me. God is love, right? So I don't have any fears there. There's a lot of things like that people might find. So Paul and Silas as examples on how they encourage the young church of Philippi can teach us some of these same principles that we can use as well to overcome situations that we might encounter. Sometimes when we find those things, sometimes the best thing you do is pray, right? And maybe God will at that point say, hey, I want you to do this instead to find out how to reach them or something. We would need to be a people that are ready to find ways to take advantage of the opportunities that God gives us, no matter where it might be. Every opportunity we should say, okay, what do you want to do in this situation, God? That's the kind of the thing to remember. Anyway, in our handouts, we also have, let's see, there's something else I was going to point to in my handouts. What was it? Yeah, I got the map. Oh, there it is. Comfort zone, I talked about that already, right? Who is from. Key cities on Paul's journey. We talked about a little bit about Philippi. That's on there too. Thessalonica. I don't see Berea on here, but that was probably another one too. Also, there's a hymn called I Will Sing the Wondrous Story. And this is an interesting hymn. There's actually two versions of this hymn, and you may be familiar with one and not the other. This one here is a tune that comes from the Heiferdal, it was called. And right now I cannot remember how it goes. I thought for sure I'd be able to sing. I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me, how he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary. I was lost, but Jesus found me, found the sheep that went astray. Through his loving arms around me, drew me back into his way. Now I think that's actually version number 2. That wasn't version number 1, and right now it's not coming to my mind. But anyway, it's a great hymn. It speaks about how we're telling that wondrous story of what Christ has done for us. And that's kind of the main point of this study today, is to be ready to do that. Be ready to tell that wondrous story, right? Let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Almost on time. I know they rang the bell, but they rang the bell early, Steve.
Yeah, and?
That's just the way it is. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunities we have that you give us, those divine appointments that you put in our ways, just like you did for Paul and Silas and then Luke and Timothy as well. And Lord, help us to take advantage of that and give us the guidance and the wisdom as we come across these opportunities to witness. And I just pray for your encouragement as we do that, Lord. And we would remember to encourage other Christians as well who may be experiencing a difficult time, especially while witnessing. And I just thank you again for this day you've given us. And I just pray you should be with our pastor while he's away from us be with Pastor Derek as he's going to be pinch hitting for our pastor. And I just thank you for the decisions that will be made in your son's precious name. Amen. All right. Thank you guys for being with us online, especially, and here. And we're a little, like I said, a little low in our attendance today, but glad to have you with us. And again, my name is Norm Ellis, and this is Grace Baptist Church, the Adult One Bible Study. Glad you could be here, and I hope to see you again next week. Stand by the same YouTube channel. Pastor Derek will be preaching in the next hour. Again, thank you very much, and bye. God bless.
Anybody that's anybody is here.
That's right.
And those that aren't, I'm still watching more of it.